let's begin. Hello everyone and welcome to BHD Studios. Today we'll be talking about the TT Artisan 27mm f2.8 autofocus lens for Fujifilm X mount. Now I have an article on Fuji Love magazine, go check it out. It's a kind of very concise full review with tons of pictures. I will insert photos throughout this video so that you can see the photos, and it's kind of a mixed bag. I think, what was the article here? I got the article here. I said, how good or bad is the TT Artisan 27mm f2.8? And really, I actually wanted to say how good and bad, because this lens is both good and bad. There's definitely some really good points about this lens, as well as some cons that would keep people away. So let's kind of quickly go over the pros first. $149 USD. Just that alone for a autofocus lens for Fujifilm X mount is pretty darn good. It's a very low risk investment for $150. You can spend that much on a filter. And so to get a properly autofocus lens that has the contacts for XF data exchange, it's pretty darn good. And so $150 is the key reason why this lens is a pro compared to Fujifilm's $400 lens, which I've never considered buying, because although the lens is okay, it just wasn't really worth me spending $400 for a lens that I thought was okay. Because, you know, my favorite lens for street photography in the Leica M mount system is both the 28 and the 40, and that's the 40M Rorecore from Minolta. And so I love the 40mm as an alternative to either 35 or 50 for street, because it's kind of in the middle. So I should love 27mm, but with both Fujifilm and TT Artisan, there is no high performance 27mm. I would love for someone to make a 27 f2, or well, f1.4 might be a little bit too big and bulky, but 27 f2, or at least a high quality, high performing 27mm. But I don't think that'll happen because it's not a very popular focal length. So I am happy that TT Artisan has made this lens. And another thing other than price is that this lens actually is sharp from f2.8 throughout the range. It does get a little bit sharper like any lens as you stop it down, but even at f2.8 I've punched in this lens, especially from medium to far distances, and a lot of the photos were taken on the X-T5, and so I was actually surprised at how much this lens can resolve even on the X-T5, but mostly on the X Pro 3 here, because you can see it's nice and compact, and it kind of works with cameras like the XE4 and the X Pro 3, and it doesn't work well with cameras with big grips because of the aperture ring, but that's a con. Let's just stay on the pros. Sharp lens. I could not see chromatic aberration. I took a photo of like trees with the backlit sky, and usually on the edge you can see chromatic aberration. Couldn't see it. So even chromatic aberration is very well controlled on this lens. Autofocus, stepping motor, nice and quiet, much quieter than Fujifilm's, much quicker and more accurate than Fujifilm. It's just a nice, I mean, you can hear it. Right? So it makes noise, but it's quieter than Fujifilm's. And so that's also a great plus. Another pro is that this lens is mostly metal construction. Even this is even a metal mount lens, and there you can see the contacts there, and mostly metal construction. So it feels solid. It's nice and light and compact, but it still has a nice solid feel. But construction seems pretty decent. Again, for the price, is a great deal. And finally, if you like sun stars, I do, you stop it down, you get some decent sun stars on this lens, starting around f8, f11, so you're starting to stop down quite a bit. So those are the pros of this lens. And so if someone says, hey, this lens is sharp, it must be a good lens, the biggest con of this lens is the contrast at f2.8. Now I'll put in some samples here. I think one of the ones is like with TJ at f2.8 indoors, very low contrast at f2.8, very low. And then I stop down to f5, and then the contrast looks normal. I think even by f4, there's a huge leap from f2.8 to f4. The colors look kind of muted, and it just doesn't look good indoors at f2.8. And then when you stop it down, all of a sudden the contrast bumps up. Now there are times where at certain angles, I have a photo of this old man sitting down in Chinatown outdoors, f2.8, and you don't really see low contrast, and of course you can always toggle that in post. So sometimes it's very apparent, other times it isn't. I think a lot of it has to do with the multi-coating on this lens. Fujifilm's EBC, the electron beam coating, and other brands, I think Japanese over the past few decades have really improved their multi-coating. I think Pentax is one of the first ones with the SMC or super multi-coat, and a lot of the Japanese filter companies like Hoya really improved on that multi-coating technology. I think the biggest weakness of this lens, because the optical design is good, because you could see how sharp this lens is that with the contrast and with flare and ghosting, especially at f2.8, horrible. So do not shoot into the sun. I'll post samples of it, but I thought it was a mistake, like how bad, or maybe I had a bad copy, but no, everybody else complained about the same thing. So if you're shooting into the sun, if you like to shoot at f2.8, if there's stray lighting everywhere, this lens is not good for that. This lens is, unless you are trying to get weird, blotchy, ghosty, flary images, which I think most of you don't want that. But even as you stop down, sometimes that flare ghosting doesn't disappear. So that's a huge weakness of this, and I think it has to do with their multi-coating technology. Another issue is vignetting, but to me, I'll post again some examples, but I think with a lens like this and for the style of photography that I do, which is street photography, I don't really care about the vignetting. Maybe it's because I'm also used to older vintage lenses, like M-mount lenses. The kind of like my favorite 28 f2, it vignettes. My M Roker 40mm f2, it vignettes. Even like the 35 f2 Summicron from Leica, it vignettes at f2. So this thing here, definitely you could see the vignetting f2.8. For some photos, it actually kind of works. And even if you stop it down to like f8, there's still a little bit of vignetting. So if you want even lighting across, you're not going to get that with this lens. You're always going to get some kind of vignetting. And but I think it kind of adds character to this lens. And I'm going to keep on using that term character, but for street photography, having that vignetting is something that I can live with. I actually think it adds a little bit of a quality. Sometimes, especially when I'm using certain film simulations like Classic Neg, and I'm doing street photography, old brick walls, I find that the character of this lens, it just works with the photos, especially if I'm in Classic Neg or Classic Chrome. It just has this, if the only word I can think of maybe is like kind of a melancholy, moody kind of a look to the image that I like. And so at times this lens works, and other times it just doesn't work. And with the vignetting, with the flare, with the ghosting, for some people it's a no-go, no matter what, even if it's $150. For other people, it's like, wow, this has some character to this lens. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for, but look through my photos again at Fujilove or what I've embedded here. If this is the kind of style you want and you want a cheap kind of a bang around lens, then this is probably the way to go. But that's the other thing about this lens is there is no weather sealing. So the Fujifilm, the new XF27 f2.8, I think it's like RWR, right? So it is weather sealed, I think. I'm going to delete this part if it isn't. And so there's no weather sealing in this, but again, for $150, I wouldn't complain. Just live with it, and if it breaks, then just buy another one. And as well, the aperture ring is very narrow, and so as I was mentioning, if you had something like an XS10 or an XH2 with a large kind of a grip, then this is way too narrow. On X Pro 3, XE4, it's fine. And so I enjoyed using this on the X Pro 3 and as well actually the XT5, but I didn't like the narrowness of this aperture ring. Another one is firmware updates. You have to use their rear lens cap that has a USB in, which allows for firmware updates. It makes sense that Fujifilm wouldn't let a third-party manufacturer update the lens firmware using Fujifilm's own OS, and so that's another negative if you want to update, but it's a small price to pay. It's included with the lens, so that's great. Other manufacturers will make you pay for a firmware update, sort of a connector like Sigma, but this one here is included, so it's not a big deal. And finally, the final con is just resale value. If you're the type of person that buys a lens and then uses it for a little bit, and if you don't like it, you're like, I'm gonna sell it and take a 20%, 30% hit. Maybe that's so with the Fujifilm OEM lens, not so with any of these third-party lenses. If you buy this for $150, I'm guessing resale value is probably almost half, maybe $75, $80. And so you're saving $250 buying this lens. I'm sure resale value isn't a big deal. So my final thoughts, do I recommend this lens? Yes, for $150, this lens is sharp. This lens has character, especially if you don't mind vignetting. That's something you just can't really get rid of other than in post. The flare and the low contrast at f2.8 kind of bothers me, but as a street photographer, I'm usually at f5.6, f8 anyways. And there were times where I shot f2.8 and it actually didn't look too bad. And most of those shots I noticed that the light was behind me. So f2.8, vignetting, low contrast, beware of your surroundings and how you're shooting at f2.8. But some of you might think, hey, like I actually like that look, then go for it. That's the kind of look that you get with this. Build quality seems decent. Having the aperture ring is nice. Having autofocus is nice, because a lot of these third-party lenses, they tend to not be autofocus. So I think this is TT Artisan's first, at least at this time, their first autofocus lens for Fujifilm X mount. So I would love to see them maybe making their own version of like the 18 f2. I think that'd be great. TT Artisan, if you can make that for Fujifilm in autofocus, give some competition for Fujifilm's own 18 f2, which hasn't been updated yet, and it's quite an expensive lens for what it is, and so that would be great. But I'm overall happy with this lens. Thank you so much, TT Artisan, for sending this to me. Let me know if you have any questions down below. But again, check out my article at Fujilove, where I post tons of photos. If you want some critical examination of how this lens performs at various apertures, I have it all there. Again, any questions, just let me know down below and I'll try to answer them. And let me know what you guys think about this studio setup. I don't mind talking while standing, and I'm actually just using two Aperture MC lights as my key light, and then I'm using another Aperture MC here. I'll just move this out of the way. See that? That's a little bit of a fill light over here. And I have my Rode Video Micro up here, XT4 with the 16 to 80 at f4 for my talking head, and then the GVM panel light for the blue background. I got another Aperture MC here for that kind of the purple light over here. And for my strap, I have the Coupe Orange Collection rope strap in kind of this blue, and I'm wearing a Coupe sweater. I love this sweater. And anything else? I don't know. 2 watches. We'll talk to you soon. Happy shooting. Peace.